Good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. Sophia Beecher, and welcome to another Tooth Talk Thursdays. So, today we're going to talk about cracked teeth. Now, cracked teeth is one of the hardest things to diagnose, and oftentimes a lot of patients will bounce from dentist to dentist, and the one who finally gets it right looks like the genius. So, what causes teeth to crack? Well, first of all, cracked teeth are caused from trauma. So it can be repeated trauma from diet. For example, those folks that love the bones, right? Which I really should do a poll to find out which bone is your favorite bone. So we have the top contenders are normally oxtail bones, curry goat bones, chicken bones, pork bones, right? And so with the repeated crushing of bones, you will fracture the teeth because you're basically overloading the teeth, and eventually the enamel can't stand it anymore and it just breaks off. Even worse when these teeth are undermined by stuff like cavities. Also, in terms of your diet, ice, nuts. I know some people like to crack hard nuts or nut shells like pistachios with their teeth. Very, very bad idea, right? So that can lead to tooth fractures. Also, if you have stress habits like grinding or clenching your teeth, right? If you may be grinding your teeth because your bite is not properly aligned, that can also cause fractures of the teeth. If you have trauma due to excessive force, for example, a sports injury like a hit to the lip or a fist fight, or you fall and hit a tooth, then you can have cracked teeth as a result of these. If you have, we spoke about cavities. So if your tooth is undermined with decay, then, sorry, yes, if your tooth is undermined with decay, it's more prone to being fractured. So if you had decay and you have a filling and it's a large filling, then the tooth would have been undermined, right? So a tooth like that is more prone to being fractured. And oftentimes we would advise you to crown such a tooth to protect the remaining tooth structure that you have. So in terms of people who are more likely to experience fractures, these are patients who are over 40 years statistically, and they say that women have a higher incidence of tooth fractures than men, maybe because we're more stressed out, I don't know. So in terms of which teeth are most likely to fracture, firstly we have the lower molars. So the lower molars are twice as likely to fracture as the upper molars, right, which are more likely to fracture than the upper premolars. Then you have the lower premolars, and then you have other teeth. So as I said, I started the presentation by saying that a cracked tooth is one of the hardest things to diagnose. If you have symptoms, then it's great because it's a lot easier for us. So some of the symptoms may be very vague in the early stages. I literally had a patient who told me, "Doc, my tooth feels funny." Yes, that's all he said. "Doc, my tooth feels funny." We did everything, and we'll talk about ways that we can check to see if you have a crack. And I found nothing at the time, and a year later the tooth split down the middle, and it turns out that there was a crack in the tooth. Right, so the symptoms can be very vague in the early stages, and contrary to popular belief, a crack is not visible on an x-ray. So we may do x-rays a lot of the time, but we have messages coming in. Sorry about that. We may do x-rays a lot of the times, and it may just help us to rule out other things, but an x-ray won't necessarily show us that, hey, a crack is visible unless the tooth is actually split. So with that being said, how on earth do we diagnose these things? So of course, with everything, we take a history. So what are your habits, your dietary habits? What is your stress level? What are your symptoms, if any? So common symptoms when you have a cracked tooth may be sensitivity to hot and cold, discomfort when you bite down and then you release, then you'll feel something. And you may have just intermittent pain, or you may have a funny feeling. Okay. So during the examination, things that we look for obviously if we can see any fracture lines. Now, the presence of a fracture line may not mean much generally, because you can have teeth that have these fracture lines or these stress lines and they're asymptomatic, okay? But so we look for the fracture lines, and we will give you something to bite down on to see if you get a painful response when you bite down and you release. We will also look to see if you have any missing teeth, which would mean that you're putting more pressure on your existing teeth. Right? We'll look to see if you have any pieces of tooth obviously broken off. Right? Because some of the times a patient will come and say, oh, hey doc, I just chipped my tooth, and it's more than just the chip you're seeing. There's actually a crack extending down in the tooth that we can't see. So a lot of times it's after we have done the filling that the patient will say, well, doc, you feel it and it's hurting now. Right? And then that will clue us in as to what's really going on. You may also have a deep pocket around a tooth that has a crack, which is, it's very helpful when you do have that, but again, a lot of times that may not be present. All right, so as I said, very, very difficult to diagnose. In terms of how we manage this, well, it will depend on the severity of the symptoms. Okay, so you may have these little stress lines or these fracture lines in the tooth, and they may be asymptomatic, and we may choose not to do anything except to tell you to change your habits. Very important in terms of any treatment that we do, change those bad habits. So if you know you're chewing bones, ice, nuts, if you're opening bottles with your teeth, if you're cracking crab shells with your teeth, you need to stop. Okay, because it will just make the situation worse. So let's say you're experiencing symptoms. Well, it depends on the severity of the symptoms that will dictate the treatment. So if you just chipped off a piece of tooth, we can put a filling and we can monitor it for any symptoms. If you're experiencing pain to hot, cold, pain when you're biting down, then the next step is to refer you to the endodontist or the root canal specialist. And as I tell my patients, they're the guys with the microscopes, so they can look and see exactly how far down that fracture is extending to let you know, hey, this tooth needs a root canal and then a crown immediately, or hey, this tooth is fractured too far down the root. We can't do anything to save it. You need to extract it. So unfortunately, for a lot of cracked teeth, once they have gotten to the point where you're experiencing those kind of symptoms, a lot of times they have to be removed, and then you have to think about your options, your replacement options, like an implant. So you've heard it before, and it's gonna annoy you, but an ounce of prevention is better than cure. So no bad habits, no chewing of bones, ice, hard nuts. Right? But if you have a lot of large fillings, I'll let you know that routine chewing of nuts will crack the fillings, okay? Because the fillings they won't stand up to routine chewing of nuts. So maybe you can try blending them or having them in some other way, mashing them up into a powder form and sprinkling them on salad, something like that. Also, if you're having issues with tooth grinding, then we may recommend a night guard for you. We may also recommend an orthodontic assessment if we see that you're getting fractures as a result. Oh, another thing is that you can have the cracked teeth as a result of your bite being off, or a malocclusion. That's what we call it. So if we see that your bite is severely off, we'll say to you, hey, you need orthodontic assessment to prevent this condition from getting worse. So we'll send it to the orthodontist for braces. If you play sports, we're going to recommend mouth guards to prevent those traumatic injuries, especially to the front teeth. Alright? So that's basically it for cracked teeth. If you think you have a cracked tooth, go and see a dentist now and stop chewing bones. Okay, take care, enjoy the rest of your day.